Why did the radio suddenly go quiet, right when the wrong man stepped into her scope? The desert wind didn't care that she was 19. It didn't care that her name still sounded like a student's name. It only whispered across the sand, shifting everything by inches, just enough to ruin lives. Check fire, blue on blue. The command came sharp, panic, distorted by static. Somewhere far below her, men were shouting, arguing, afraid. Our Vance didn't answer right away. She lay prone in the hide, cheek pressed into the stock of her rifle, her breathing so slow it barely fogged the lens. The world through the scope was reduced to lines and numbers, windage, elevation, distance, heartbeat. The man in her crosshairs wore multicam. He moved like an operator. His posture said trained, confident, deadly. But he dragged the hostage with the wrong hand. Negative, Ara said finally, her voice barely louder than a thought. Target is hostile. Silence on the net. If you're wrong, someone snapped back, you're going to Leavenworth for life. Her finger rested on the trigger, 4 pounds of pressure, clean break. If you're right, the voice continued, softer now, then we've been compromised since touchdown. Ara swallowed. She didn't look away from the scope. I have PFC Vance, she said calmly. Stand down. The wind shifted. A sudden gust, full value, right to left. The shot became impossible. Her heart rate dropped anyway. 45 beats per minute. The desert blurred for a moment as sand lifted into the air. Her crosshairs danced, not from fear, but from physics. She adjusted, not the scope herself. Sending it. The rifle bucked. The sound echoed once, then disappeared into the open desert. 72 hours earlier, they'd laughed at her. The sun at Joint Base Lewis McChord didn't shine. It pressed down like a hand on the back of the neck. Heat soaked into the range until the air shimmered and the dust burned when it touched skin. Ara lay prone in that same heat, her body almost swallowed by the rifle and oversized gear. 5'4", narrow shoulders, brown hair tucked tight beneath her helmet. Her spotter, Corporal Henders, whispered like the range might hear him. Winds picking up, 12 to 15, 3 o'clock. I see it, Ara murmured. She wasn't looking at the flags. She was watching the air itself. Heat waves bent the world at 800 meters. The targets weren't just far, they were distorted, stretched into mirages that lied to the eye. Behind her, the observation deck filled with crossed arms and mirrored sunglasses. SEAL Team 4. They weren't cruel, not really. They were bored. Look at the size of that kid, someone said loudly. Recruiter must have rated a junior high science fair. Laughter rippled. Henders flinched. Ignore them, Vance, just qualify. Ara didn't answer. She was listening to the math. Shooter ready, the range safety officer barked. 10 targets, hostage scenario, 45 seconds. The laughter faded into background noise. Target 1, 400 meters. Exposure 3 seconds. Crack. Steel rang. Target 2, moving 550, left to right. She led it by instinct born of repetition. Crack. Hit, Henders said, surprised. The rhythm took her. Not adrenaline, not anger. Sequencer. Target 8 appeared behind mesh, partially obscured. The impossible one. No laser lock, guesswork for everyone else. Ara didn't guess. She adjusted 3 clicks up, 1 left. Pressed. Waited. 1 second. Then the faintest ding drifted back on the wind. Silence fell over the range like a held breath. Cease fire. The scoreboard lit up. Perfect. Not just clean. Record-breaking. Lieutenant Cole didn't believe it. He walked down from the deck, boots loud on gravel, arrogance wrapped in expensive gear. That rifle's modified, he said, or the sensors are rigged. Ara looked up slowly. It's standard issue, sir. He crouched close, too close. Nobody hits target 8 like that. It wasn't luck, she said quietly. Then what was it? Geometry. He didn't like that answer. By nightfall, she was in a cargo plane, wedged between ammo pallets in silence. Nobody spoke to her. She was the load. When turbulence hit, she moved before the warning came, before instinct caught up. The case slid. 80 pounds of metal and momentum. She dove. Not with strength. With physics. The impact crushed air from her lungs as she wedged the case into place, boots locked, spine screaming. Miller stared at her afterward, no jokes left. Cole watched, said nothing. 2 hours later, the map unfolded. Urban dense, hostiles trained. They have a sniper, Cole said, a good one. Ara nodded. That's why she was there. By the time she climbed the rusted water tower, fear clawed at her legs. By the time she found the enemy sniper, fear was gone. The tower swayed. The wind lied. The city held its breath. Her shot arrived first. The ghost vanished. And down below, men she barely knew lived because of her. But when the courtyard filled with civilians, when the bundle cried, her math failed. Her bullet missed. Barely. She saw the baby. And something inside her cracked. She stayed silent after that. Watched. Waited. Doubted. Until mortars walked toward them. Until survival narrowed to one impossible shot. 1 mile. Too far. She turned off the radio. Not out of defiance. Out of clarity. She fired. The night exploded. And when it was over, Cole just nodded. Later, bleeding in the street, he grabbed her ankle. She pulled free. I'm not being a hero, she said. I'm balancing the equation. She stayed. She ran. She fought in the dark with 4 rounds and a knife. And when the false Americans appeared at the end, dragging a hostage, her scope steadied again. The same choice. The same weight. Somewhere far behind her, the desert wind shifted. Again. Why did the figures moving toward the wounded man look right, yet feel wrong in her bones? Ara Vance didn't trust instincts. Instincts were messy, emotional, unreliable. But the moment she saw the way those men moved, something cold tightened in her chest. They came out of the darkness with confidence that didn't belong to locals. Clean spacing, overlapping fields, weapons held low, not sloppy. Their silhouettes matched American operators almost perfectly. Almost. The man dragging the captive moved with casual efficiency, like the weight meant nothing. He raised his sidearm and fired without ceremony. 1 shot, no hesitation. Ara's breath caught. That wasn't a battlefield necessity. That was disposal. She zoomed in. The flags on their shoulders were wrong, the colors muted, the infrared reflection dull, like cheap fabric pretending to be something else. The spacing of their gear was off by centimeters, not enough for anyone to notice in motion, enough for her. They're not ours, she whispered, though no one was listening anymore. Her radio crackled with half-words and static. The net was chaos. The QRF call had been a lie, or worse, bait. She tracked the lead man through her scope, calculated distance, angle, wind coming off the sea, light but unpredictable through the alleys. Then she saw it. Behind the convoy, barely visible in the darkness, another group moved, quieter, smaller, carrying long tubes on their shoulders. Mortars. They're setting up, Ara said aloud to no one. They're setting up again. She swung the rifle back toward the intersection where she'd left Cole. The smoke had thinned. The street looked empty. Too empty. She scanned deeper. There. A shadow slumped against a wall. A familiar shape. A broad shoulder. A man who had once looked invincible now looked small, folded inward by blood loss and pain. Cole. He was still alive. She felt something shift inside her, not relief, not fear. Responsibility, heavy and unavoidable. Ara broke from cover and ran. Her boots slapped stone. Her lungs burned. She kept low, moving through debris and doorways, every step a risk. The rifle felt heavier now, no longer a tool but a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. When she reached him, he was barely conscious. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "You didn't run," he murmured, more accusation than praise. "I don't leave equations unfinished," she said, kneeling beside him. She checked the wound again. Bad, still bleeding, though slower. She tightened the pressure bandage with hands that no longer shook. "Listen to me," she said softly. "Those aren't friendlies. They're using U.S. patterns to get close." Cole coughed, a wet sound that made her jaw tighten. "I know," he rasped. "That's why we're still here." Her head snapped up. "You knew." "They wanted us boxed," he said. "Force us to trust the wrong help." "And you didn't tell me." His mouth twitched faintly. "You were busy being right." She absorbed that without comment. The distant thump came again. Another mortar round launched. "Time of flight," Ara muttered. 10 seconds, maybe 12. The explosion landed farther away this time. Testing, walking closer. "They're bracketing," Cole said weakly. "I know." Ara looked around the street. Broken walls, burned cars, doorways blown open like mouths frozen mid-scream. No safe place, no clean angles. Her mind did what it always did under pressure. It simplified. Variables, constants, eliminate noise. The false QRF was moving west, closing. The mortar team was setting up south. Infantry shadows were repositioning north. They were being squeezed. "We can't hold here," she said. Cole laughed softly, then winced. "You finally agree with me." "We never could," she replied, "but we can make them think we are." She pulled out her last smoke grenade. Cole's eyes followed it. "That won't stop mortars." "It won't," she agreed, "but it will make them impatient." She stood. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Up." She climbed the nearest stairwell, half collapsed, leading to the remains of a second floor. From there, she had line of sight to 3 streets and the glow of the sea beyond. She popped the smoke. The street filled with gray, swallowing the intersection, obscuring Cole completely. Then she fired. One shot. Not at a person. At a window frame. The report echoed sharp and unmistakable, a declaration. The enemy took the bait. Gunfire erupted immediately, rounds chewing through smoke and masonry where they thought she was. She moved. Another shot, different angle. Then silence. She waited. The mortars fired again. "Too fast." "They're rushing," she whispered. "They think we're disorganized." She leaned into the scope and scanned south. The mortar team was adjusting, too confidently, too exposed. But the distance was wrong again, still outside her comfort zone, still beyond what should be possible. Ara felt the old doubt stir, the memory of the baby, the almost mistake, the realization that numbers could lie. Her finger hesitated. Below her, Cole shifted weakly, trying to raise his weapon. "No," she said sharply, "don't." She closed her eyes. Not to escape, but to remember. The range, the laughter, the impossible target behind mesh, the way she'd trusted the math when everyone else trusted reputation. Math didn't promise safety. It promised truth. She opened her eyes. The mortar team clustered around their tube, rushing reloads. One man bent to lift a round. Another shouted. They were human, fallible, rushed. She adjusted higher than felt reasonable, held farther left than instinct allowed. "Sending it," she whispered, not as an announcement but as a commitment. The rifle bucked. The bullet traveled a mile of night, losing speed, wobbling, becoming something fragile and stubborn. It struck not a man, but the ground beside them. Close enough. The round skipped, shattered rock, and detonated a secondary explosion from stacked ammunition they hadn't spaced properly. Fire bloomed. The tube flipped. The team vanished into dust and flame. The following mortar round never came. The street went quiet. For a long moment, Ara stayed still, waiting for the math to correct her. It didn't. She climbed down. Cole looked up at her, eyes clearer now, adrenaline cutting through the morphine haze. "You broke their spine," he said. "No," she replied. "I just removed a constant." The sound of engines rose again, but this time it was different. Heavier, controlled, familiar. Real QRF. This time the insignia reflected correctly. The movement matched doctrine. The spacing was right. Ara stepped back, suddenly exhausted. The weight of everything she'd held together threatened to collapse at once. As medics rushed in, she leaned against a wall and slid down, rifle across her lap. Her hands shook now. Not from fear. From release. Cole was loaded onto a stretcher. As they lifted him, he reached out weakly and caught her sleeve. "You saved us," he said. Ara swallowed. "I almost killed a child," she said quietly. He held her gaze. "You didn't." "But I could have." He nodded. "That's the part no one talks about." They loaded him onto the vehicle. The door closed. Ara remained where she was, staring at the empty street, the smoke thinning, the night reclaiming itself. She thought of the laughter on the range, the challenge, the equations, the shots that landed and the one that didn't. She thought of how close certainty and catastrophe really were. Sometimes precision wasn't about being right. Sometimes it was about knowing when to pause, when to doubt, when to hold the trigger, and when not to. She stood as the convoy pulled away. The mission was over. The numbers would never forget her. And neither would she. Why did the applause feel louder than the gunfire ever had? Ara Vance stood at the edge of the hangar, helmet tucked under her arm, boots still dusted with someone else's country. The lights were too bright. The air smelled like oil, disinfectant, and something sharp she couldn't name. Home, they called it. It didn't feel like anything yet. When the door opened, the noise hit her all at once. Cheers, whistles, hands clapping hard enough to sting palms raw. She didn't move. The SEALs lined up in front of her, men who had mocked her size, questioned her place, laughed at her silence. Some were grinning. Some looked uncomfortable. A few stared at the floor like they were recalculating something long overdue. She waited for the feeling she thought would come. Pride, relief, triumph. Instead, her stomach tightened. Because applause had a way of erasing the parts no one wanted to remember. Lieutenant Cole was rolled in on a chair, pale but upright, one arm in a sling. When he saw her, he didn't clap. He nodded once. Small, precise. That meant more. "PFC Vance," the commander said, stepping forward. "Outstanding performance under extreme conditions." Performance. The word echoed strangely in her head. She stepped forward when told, stood when told, answered questions in short, clean sentences, distance, wind, timing, decision-making. They wanted explanations that fit neatly into after-action reports. She gave them numbers. What she didn't give them were the pauses, the moments where her finger hovered, the weight in her chest when a silhouette looked too small, the way the math sometimes whispered one thing while her gut screamed another. Someone handed her a coin, heavy, gold. A symbol. She turned it over in her palm. It felt cold, uninterested. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bunk, rifle disassembled on the floor in front of her, cleaning pieces that didn't need cleaning. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the building settling. Her hands moved automatically. Her mind didn't. Every time she closed her eyes, the scope came back. The wrong hand, the wrong flag, the baby's cry echoing through her memory, distorted, endless. She pressed her palms against her eyes until colors burst. "You're back," Henders said softly from the doorway. She hadn't heard him approach. "Didn't feel like it," she replied. He leaned against the frame, unsure, like he wasn't certain he was allowed in this moment. "They're calling you a legend already." She huffed a humorless breath. "Legends don't hesitate." "Good ones do," he said. She didn't answer. The next morning, the range called. Not for qualification. For comparison. The top 10 shooters from the SEAL team stood in a loose line, relaxed, confident. Combined kills in live-fire drills flashed on the board behind them like a scoreboard from another life. Ara was placed at the end. Freshman. Unranked. Uncelebrated by history. Same conditions, the range officer said. Same wind. The laughter didn't come this time. It was worse. Expectation. She lay prone, heart steady, breathing controlled. The rifle felt familiar again, like something honest. But something had changed. She noticed it immediately. Her hands didn't rush. Her mind didn't narrow. She saw more. The space between targets, the shifting wind patterns that weren't uniform, the way Mirage bent differently at 700 meters than at 9. She fired. The first shot landed clean. So did the second. And the third. The range grew quiet. Not stunned. Attentive. She kept going. Not fast, not slow. Intentional. By the time the final target fell, the numbers spoke louder than any cheer ever could. Her score eclipsed theirs. All of them. Combined. No one clapped. No one spoke. The silence was heavy with recalibration. Later, alone again, Ara sat on the bleachers, watching the wind move across the empty range. Cole joined her, moving carefully, pain still etched into his posture. "You proved your point," he said. She shook her head. "I didn't have one." He studied her for a long moment. That's what scares them. She didn't look at him. What happens when the math is wrong? He followed her gaze to the targets. "Then you live with it." "That's it. That's everything." Weeks passed. Briefings, debriefs, simulations, invitations she declined. Her name traveled faster than she did. Stories sharpened her into something simpler, cleaner, safer to admire. She started avoiding mirrors. One evening she found herself back on the tower, not on orders, not for training. Just to sit. The city below was calm. Lights flickered on in windows. Somewhere someone laughed. Somewhere a child cried for an entirely different reason. She rested the rifle beside her, without looking through the scope. For the first time in a long while, she let herself feel tired. Not physically. Morally. She wondered how many decisions she had left before the math stopped protecting her. She wondered if silence was strength or avoidance. The wind brushed past her cheek, gentle this time, like it wasn't trying to trick her anymore. Ara closed her eyes. She didn't see targets. She saw people. And for the first time since she joined, she allowed herself to hope that remembering that would matter more than any number ever could. Because sometimes, surviving isn't about being the best shot. Sometimes, it's about staying human when precision would make that easier to forget. Why did the order feel heavier than the rifle she'd carried across continents? Ara read the message twice, then a third time. It wasn't long, it didn't need to be. Selected, embedded, advisory capacity, forward operations. No congratulations, no flourish. Just a quiet summons back into the kind of darkness that didn't announce itself with explosions, but with consequences. She folded the paper slowly, as if the act itself might change what it said. Henders found her later, sitting on the steps outside the barracks, watching the sky turn the color of worn steel. "They're sending you out again," he said. She nodded. "Different place," he continued, "different rules." "Same math," she replied, though it sounded less certain than it used to. The flight was long, silent, the kind of silence that pressed inward instead of offering rest. When she arrived, the air was colder, thinner. Mountains rose like teeth against the horizon. The forward base was small, temporary, and already tired. She was introduced as an asset, not a person. The team she was embedded with was younger, sharper around the edges. Their confidence was loud, not yet worn down by consequence. She recognized herself in them and didn't like it. At the briefing table, a captain tapped the map with a pen. "Enemy cell operating out of these ridgelands. They know the terrain. We don't. They've been bleeding convoys dry." Eyes turned to Aura. "She's here to even the odds." Aura felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Even the odds. As if odds were ever fair. The first mission was reconnaissance. High altitude, long climb. The kind that turned breath into effort and effort into pain. Aura moved with the team but stayed slightly apart, watching, listening. They joked, they complained. They planned what they'd do after rotation. She stayed quiet. On the ridge, she set up her position, scope scanning the valley below. Villages scattered like afterthoughts. Smoke from cooking fires curled into the evening air. Life happening in the margins of conflict. "Eyes on," someone whispered. She saw the movement, armed men moving between structures, a cache hidden in plain sight. The radio crackled. "Confirm hostile intent." Aura hesitated. The men below were armed, yes. They were organized, yes. But they were also walking past children, past women carrying water, past old men who moved too slowly to be threats. "Stand by," she said. There was a pause. "Negative," the captain replied. "We need confirmation now." Aura adjusted the scope, zooming further, searching for something definitive. A gesture, a signal, anything that removed doubt. She found none. "I can't confirm," she said quietly. The line went silent. "Repeat," the captain said, voice tight. "I can't confirm hostile intent," she repeated. The captain exhaled sharply. "Then we lose the window." Aura didn't answer. The window closed on its own. The men dispersed, melted back into the village. The opportunity evaporated. Back at base, the tension was immediate. "You froze," one of the operators said, not unkindly but not gently either. "I paused," Aura corrected. "Same thing," he replied. The captain pulled her aside. "This isn't the range," he said. "Out here, hesitation costs lives." Aura met his gaze. So does certainty. He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "You're thinking too much." She almost laughed. That night sleep wouldn't come. She lay on her cot, listening to the wind move through the mountains. It sounded different here, less forgiving. She thought of the baby, of the almost shot, of the applause that had felt wrong. She wondered when precision had stopped being enough. The next mission came 2 days later. Ambush response, convoy hit, survivors pinned down. This time, there was no ambiguity. The enemy was entrenched, firing deliberately, trapping wounded soldiers behind a destroyed vehicle. Aura took position on a rocky outcrop, heart rate steady despite the chaos below. She worked quickly, efficiently, targets identified, lines clear. The shots landed. Clean, controlled. She watched bodies fall and felt nothing. That scared her more than doubt ever had. When it was over, the convoy was extracted, Lives saved. The base buzzed with relieved energy. Someone clapped her on the shoulder. That's more like it. She forced a nod. Later, alone again, she scrubbed her hands until the skin reddened, as if she could wash away the absence she felt inside. Days blurred together, missions varied, decisions stacked. Sometimes she paused, sometimes she didn't. Each choice left a mark she couldn't see but felt accumulating. One afternoon, she noticed a change in herself. She no longer flinched when the radio crackled. She no longer replayed shots at night. The math had become easier. Too easy. The realization hit her harder than any explosion. She had adapted. An adaptation, she knew, could be its own kind of loss. On the ridge one evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, she lowered her rifle and sat back. The valley below was quiet, peaceful, almost deceptively so. She thought of the younger version of herself, the girl on the range, mocked and underestimated, holding onto precision like a lifeline. She wondered what that girl would think of who she was becoming. "Are you okay?" a voice asked. She looked up to see Henders, deployed separately but passing through, standing nearby. "I don't know," she admitted. He sat beside her, saying nothing for a long moment. "You don't have to be perfect," he said eventually. "You just have to be honest with yourself." Ara watched the light fade. "I'm afraid of what happens when I stop questioning," she said. He nodded, "Then don't stop." The wind picked up, cool and steady. Ara lifted her rifle again, not to aim but to hold. She wasn't done yet. Not with the mission. Not with herself. And somewhere deep inside, beneath layers of discipline and calculation, a quiet resolve formed, not to be flawless, not to be legendary, but to remain awake to the weight of every choice. Because sometimes, the bravest thing isn't pulling the trigger. It's feeling the cost of doing so, and choosing to carry it anyway. Why did the silence after the shot feel louder than any command she'd ever ignored? The valley didn't echo this time. No return fire, no shouted warnings, no chaos rushing in to justify what she'd done. Just quiet. Ara stayed behind the scope long after the target dropped from view. Her finger remained straight, disciplined, off the trigger. Her breathing slowed until it matched the rhythm she'd trained into herself years ago. 48 beats per minute. She waited for relief. It didn't come. The mission ended cleanly, too clean. The team exfiltrated without injury, without complication. Radios buzzed with calm efficiency. Back at base, reports were filed. Timelines matched. No one questioned the decision. That unsettled her more than criticism ever had. Later, she sat alone in the makeshift armory, stripping her rifle under harsh fluorescent light. Each piece came apart smoothly, familiar as bone. Her hands moved with confidence she no longer trusted. She replayed the moment again. The man had been armed, positioned, observing their route, a legitimate threat by every standard she'd been taught. And yet, there had been a pause before he raised his weapon, a fraction of a second where he looked, not toward her team, but toward the village behind him. She hadn't waited to understand why. That night she dreamed without images. Just wait. The next morning brought a briefing she hadn't expected. High-value target, known facilitator, responsible for multiple attacks. Intelligence suggested he would be traveling with family as cover. The room shifted when that last part landed. Ara felt the old tension return, sharp and immediate. "Rules of engagement?" someone asked. "Unchanged," the captain replied. "Positive identification, minimize collateral." Ara stared at the map. The route cut straight through a populated area, narrow streets, markets, places where certainty frayed. She raised her hand. "What if we can't separate him from civilians?" she asked. The captain met her gaze. Then you decide whether the risk of waiting outweighs the cost of acting. The room was quiet. The responsibility settled squarely on her shoulders. On the rooftop that evening, Ara sat up early. The sun dipped low, painting the city in warm colors that felt almost mocking. Life moved below her, vendors packing up stalls, children running, voices overlapping in languages she didn't speak but recognized as ordinary. She watched the route. She waited. The convoy appeared just before dusk, two vehicles unarmored, moving cautiously. She tracked the second vehicle. There he was. The facilitator matched the photo, older than she'd expected, beard threaded with gray, sitting in the back, relaxed, one arm resting protectively around a woman beside him. A child leaned against his knee. Ara's chest tightened. Her scope felt heavier. She adjusted her position, searching for an angle that isolated him. There wasn't one. The street was too narrow, the crowd too close. The radio whispered in her ear, "Confirm." She didn't answer. Seconds stretched. She saw him lean forward, say something to the driver. The vehicle slowed. If he exited here, he'd disappear into the market. The window was closing. Ara's mind did the math automatically. Threat assessment, probability of future harm, opportunity cost. All the numbers pointed one way. Her finger began to tighten. Then the child laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a brief, unguarded sound that cut through everything else. Ara froze. She saw the baby again. The almost shot. The moment where math had nearly erased a life she couldn't unsee. "Confirm," the radio urged again, more insistently now. Ara exhaled. "Negative," she said. "What?" the captain snapped. "I do not have a clear shot," she said, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I cannot engage without unacceptable risk." There was a long pause. "That's an order, Vance." She closed her eyes for half a second. "I understand the order," she replied. "I cannot execute it." The convoy rolled past. The facilitator disappeared into the city. The mission failed. Back at base, the reaction was immediate and brutal. "You disobeyed a direct order," the captain said, jaw tight. "Do you understand the implications of that?" "Yes, sir." "You let a killer walk." Ara met his eyes. "I refuse to kill a child." Silence filled the room. No one defended her. No one needed to. The investigation was swift, formal, cold. She was grounded pending review, removed from operational duty, her rifle locked away. For the first time in years, she was alone without purpose. Days passed slowly, too slowly. She walked the perimeter, watched helicopters lift off without her, listened to the distant sounds of missions she would never be part of again. The quiet gnawed at her. Had she made the right choice? The question refused to resolve itself. One evening, Henders found her sitting on a crate, staring at nothing. "They're talking about sending you home," he said gently. She nodded. "I figured." "Do you regret it?" he asked. Ara thought carefully before answering. "I regret that the world keeps asking for clean answers to dirty questions," she said. "But no, I don't regret the choice." He smiled faintly. "That's why they're uncomfortable." She was summoned the next morning. Not to the captain. To intelligence. They played her footage she hadn't seen before. Surveillance from another team, days after the failed strike. The facilitator was dead. Killed in an internal dispute, no civilians harmed. Ara felt her breath catch, not in triumph but in something quieter, something like release. "You delayed," the analyst said. "It changed the timing, altered internal dynamics. We believe your decision indirectly prevented a larger attack." Ara nodded slowly. "Was that your intent?" he asked. She shook her head. "I just didn't pull the trigger." They cleared her name quietly. No ceremony, no apology. She was offered another deployment. She declined. When she packed her gear, she moved carefully, deliberately, as if honoring something fragile. Before she left, she returned to the range one last time. The target stood silent, patient, unjudging. She didn't fire. She simply stood there, feeling the wind, remembering who she had been, and who she chose to remain. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't come from the shot you make. It comes from the one you refuse to take. Why did walking away feel harder than any shot she'd ever taken? Ara stood at the edge of the airfield with her rucksack at her feet, the rotors already spinning somewhere behind her. The noise blurred into a constant hum, like the world reminding her it would keep moving whether she stayed or not. No one had ordered her to leave in silence. It just happened that way. There was no formation, no send-off, no last-minute change of heart from command. Paperwork had been signed. Decisions had been recorded in tidy language that couldn't hold the weight of what they meant. She watched the dust rise under the helicopter's blades and thought about how many times she'd entered places like this with purpose burning in her chest. Now she felt empty, not hollow, not broken. Just open. Henders walked up beside her, stopping a respectful distance away. He didn't try to make it lighter. He never did. "They'll talk about you," he said. She nodded. "They always do. Some will say you lost your edge." She allowed a faint smile. "I hope so." He looked at her then, really looked. "What will you do?" Ara picked up a small stone at her feet, turning it between her fingers. "I don't know yet." That answer used to terrify her. Now it felt honest. The helicopter door opened. The crew chief signaled. This was it. She slung the rucksack over her shoulder and took one last look at the base. The towers, the wire, the familiar shapes of a life defined by vigilance. She remembered the first time she'd stepped onto a range, ignored and underestimated. The laughter, the doubt, the way precision had become her armor. She remembered the desert, the city, the ridge, the moment when certainty had almost cost her something she could never give back. She climbed into the helicopter without looking back. The flight was short, quiet, no mission briefs, no objectives. Just distance. Weeks later, she found herself somewhere colder, quieter, far from any front line. A place where the wind moved through trees instead of ruins, where silence wasn't a warning. She taught. Not marksmanship in the way people expected. She taught patience. She taught restraint. She taught young soldiers how to read wind and terrain, yes, but also how to read themselves, how to recognize when confidence became blindness, when precision turned into detachment. Some listened. Some didn't. She didn't push. One afternoon, a young woman stayed behind after training, nervous, determined. "Ma'am," she said, "they say you're the best shot they ever had." Ara shook her head gently. "That's not what matters." The woman hesitated. "Then what does?" Ara looked out across the range. The targets stood still, as they always did, waiting for someone to define them as enemies. "Knowing why you pull the trigger," she said, "and being able to live with it when you do." The woman nodded slowly, absorbing something she wouldn't fully understand yet. Ara smiled just a little. At night she still dreamed. But now the dreams had faces without crosshairs, places without coordinates, moments that didn't end in a shot. She thought often about dignity, how it wasn't loud, how it didn't need permission, how it rarely looked like victory in the moment. Months passed. One evening she returned to a familiar place, the range where everything had started. It was empty, the way she preferred it. The wind moved the flags gently, not trying to trick anyone. She lay prone one last time. Not to prove anything, just to remember. She breathed, felt the ground, listened. Then she stood up and walked away without firing. As she left, she realized something had finally settled inside her. She hadn't walked away because she was afraid. She walked away because she understood the weight of what she carried and chose to carry it without hiding behind numbers or applause. Somewhere others would continue the work, shots would be taken, decisions made. The world would remain complicated, but our advance would remain herself. And sometimes that is the quietest form of victory. Because in the end, strength isn't measured by how many times you pull the trigger. It's measured by whether you still recognize your reflection after you do. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.